morning. My name is Mahmoud Hosni. I'm the Chief Investment Officer in e-finance. I would like to thank you all for being interested in knowing some about e-finance. I would like to give you an overview firstly on e-finance and the journey of e-finance since inception. E-finance has been, if you can go for the first slide please. E-finance already has been established in 2005 with the mandate to build the government financial network, which is composed of three components. The first component which started the digitalization for the financial in Egypt, started in 2007 by building the e-hub for the Ministry of Finance. The journey started to give the exclusivity for e-finance for processing for the government payment and collection through the MOU that has been signed with the CPE and Ministry of Finance to process all the government payment and collection through the infrastructure that e-finance has built for the government. The first contract to digitalize the pension for more than 7 million pensioners in Egypt in 2007, then followed by combining more than 61,000 accounts at the central bank into a single account, and this is the treasury single account where e-finance has built a sort of core banking system at the CPE to combine all those into a single account. Then we started building the GFMIS, the budgeting system for Egypt, which has been concluded in 2018. This is the start, the journey for the financial, digitalizing the financial part, but as well we have been mandated with the non-financial through the building and operating the control system for the petroleum ministry and as well as for the agriculture. The journeys have been gave e-finance the opportunity to build different platforms that is already live to the different sectors, and in the following slides we can show you the different sectors that we're serving. Lastly, starting 2020, e-finance has been spinning off and established different companies. And in this slide, we're showing in the middle e-finance. This is the core of the operation for e-finance holding, which already mandated to process all the government payment and collection, as well as owning different platforms. That is the one Lekia mentioned for the platform for the agriculture and platform for the controlling the petroleum products throughout all the outlets, and lastly the platform for the solidarity ministry. Our other subsidiary, eCourts, this is the second largest company that has been spin off beginning of 2020. The mandate for this company consists of three different lines of business. The first is car production, which already started under e-finance since inception, and now moving more into the car management. And lastly, we have been introducing our new line of business under eCards, the smart solution, which is aiming to digitalize the transportation sector and being contracted to digitalize all the entrance and exits, as well as the payment tickets for all the museums across Egypt. And for the railway stations, we've been contracted to digitalize the same for the railways, and now we're moving more into all the transportation methods, i.e. buses, public buses, metro, monorail, and so on and so forth. The third one, House is our retail arm, which is it's an aggregator for aggregators. We're providing different bills for our 13 partners who owns more than 400,000 POSs across Egypt. We deliver the bills, exclusive bills we already have from the different government bills, as well as the electricity and the other utility bills, to those partners who deliver to the retail market. And under Khalas, we're providing the different clients with the payment gateway, as well as the mobile applications, wide mobile applications. The fourth one, this is our new channel that has been provided for the market. It's e-Aswaq, which provide different e-commerce platforms for different sectors. We started with the agriculture sector, inheriting all the business that already e-finance started with since inception, and as well as providing a loan system to all the farmers. Now we're moving, providing more e-commerce platform to the other different sectors, i.e. the industrial sector, the trade sector, and others will be soon announced. Our last subsidiary, Enable, this is our call center, and we're having more than currently 60 different clients with around 1,000 seats. This is the composition of all these subsidiaries, which already were mostly of them under e-finance since inception, and the expansion plan that took place started in 2020, lasted with all this structure that we're seeing. We're having different other investments in other 6 investments. We started with e-tax. E-tax is mandated to digitalize both the General Tax Authority as well as the Real Tax Authority, and the Ministry of Finance holds more than 50 plus 1 share in this company. Our newly investments, this is which took place in Q4 2021. This is the eHealth. eHealth is the company that will mandate to provide and digitalize all the healthcare insurance in Egypt. We are having the Universal Health Insurance Authority, 50% of this in the company as a main shareholder. The third company we are having an investment in ACES. This is one of the biggest consulting firms in Egypt, IT consulting firm, and we're having as well a management contract over the company. eService is the largest outsourced company in Egypt, and it's mandated to digitalize G2G across the country. MTS, this is the company where Ministry of Finance holds more than 50%, and this is mandated to digitalize all the customs currently being under the single window, which provide digitizing all the custom process for all the importers and exporters, including all the different entities into a single account. Our last investment, this is the Mr. Payment, where we provide the payment for utilities with the mobile application. Next slide, please. So here we're showing the different sectors. We're serving the slide which is coming back 10 different sectors. It started with The slide after, please. So, those are different sectors we're currently serving, starting with the social inclusion and the petroleum sector, moving into the agriculture, and the rest falls. Okay. Can you please go back to one slide? Okay. Here we're showing quickly how we were serving the customers. We're serving our customers through different methods and devices, whether he can pay through mobile, through cards, through QR code, different methods we can provide through our different channels. We have different channels. We're already connected to the 38 banks across Egypt. We're connected to the 1,200 post office, as well as the 4,000 offices for the post office, and the 1,200 for the agriculture bank, as well as we're managing the 20,000 POSs, the government POSs across all the accounting units across Egypt. We're providing as well the payment gateway and so on and so forth. The different services that we provide, we're already licensed from the three schemas, Visa, Visa, and MasterCard. We're providing the customer as well with KYC and eKYC and other services through our operational team and the technical support team with the high security methods, and this all under our financial cloud hosting systems to provide. We can say that currently eFinance is a one-stop shop for the e-payment and the financial payment in Egypt. Next slide, please. This in Q3 2021, we've been chosen to be listed in the government program, and successfully it was the biggest IPO in the history of the EGX30 in Egypt. We've been, the IPO amounted to 5 billion EGP, with an increase of 10% of the capital increase and 15% as a sell down. The total composition for the IPO was 26.1 as a free float in the market. The success as well, that already more than 72% of the free float already subscribed by an international funds, out of which some of them were the first time to enter the Egyptian market. We managed to provide our main shareholder, the main founder, with around an internal rate of return more than 46% since inception. Follow slide, please. And out of the 10% capital increase, we're using to expand our infrastructure as well as providing more services to the customers with more innovative solutions. We're aiming to expand into the non-financial banking services either through acquisitions or by building in new entities. So, next slide, please. The main focus currently, we're focusing into expanding into the other different African countries to replicate our success stories with the government and the financial institutions in Egypt. And currently, we're focusing with different African countries, as well as some of the Arab countries, to, as I said, replicate the success and to provide the financial inclusion in those countries. The following slide, please. Here I'm showing, this is the last slide, showing the current shareholder structure. The main shareholder, the National Investment Bank in Egypt, where it holds more than 46%. National Bank of Egypt, Bank Misr, and the Egyptian Bank Company, as well as the Egyptian Company for Produce, they're having around 6.7%. And lastly, the percentage is already been for the free float around 26.1%. And this is the, in a nutshell, a quick overview on the e-finance and what's the different services, the different subsidiaries that we're already having. If you have any other questions or any other or more details, I'm happy to answer. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mahmoud Hosni, for joining us for PSF 2022 and delivering such an insightful presentation to our international audience. We would now like to move on to our last session for the day, Catalyzing Growth through Green Finance, Path to Resilience and Sustainability. I would like to invite Mr. Mahmoud Subeh, President of APCO, Middle East and North Africa, to introduce his panel members and to lead the discussion. Please step forward. Thank you. Our last session for today is Catalyzing Growth through Green Finance, Path to Resilience and Sustainability, and Mr. Mahmoud Subeh, President of APCO Middle East and North Africa, will be stepping up to the podium of the stage and will be introducing his panel members and leading the discussion. Okay, just a few seconds, and I think someone is calling them and they will be here. Thank you for your patience. We're waiting for them, but as far as I know, someone has spoken to them. They will be here immediately. Only a few moments and we will be beginning our last session for the day, Catalyzing Growth through Green Finance, Path to Resilience and Sustainability. And Mr. Mahmoud Subeh, President of APCO Middle East and North Africa, will introduce his panel members and lead the discussion. Mr. Mahmoud, if you would please step up to the stage. Thank you.
Good afternoon, everybody. We will start momentarily. We're waiting for one of the speakers. We will start in 2 minutes. 2 minutes. I promise you it will be an interactive session. Interesting. So bear with us, please. I just want to thank the esteemed panelists who've been here for a while now. We even had a discussion before the session. Thank you. Please accept our apologies. He is actually walking from the entrance here, and we will start immediately. Apologies. Thank you very much. Your Excellency, welcome. Ladies and gentlemen, could you please take your seats? We're going to start right now. Thank you. Well, on behalf of the organizers here, I would like to welcome everybody for the last session of this event today. Our session this afternoon will focus on catalyzing growth through green finance and forging a path of resilience and sustainability. The rise of ESG framework has not only compelled countries, organizations, but also businesses to become more sustainable in their practices. It also made green finance much easier for investors to pursue. However, there are challenges. Currently, there is an annual $2.5 trillion US green finance gap, which is only getting wider. If we don't bridge this gap, we won't achieve the UN Sustainable Development Goals. With COP27 arriving to this amazing city, before the end of this year, the green finance gap will surely be in the spotlight. So in this session, we will look at whether the starting point of closing this green finance gap should come from demand or from supply sides. How do we improve access and scale up green finance while at the same time incentivizing the demand for the same finance? So without further ado, I would like you to welcome our esteemed panel. Your Excellency, Dr. Mohammed Maid, Minister of Finance, Mr. Ayman Suleiman, CEO of Egypt Sovereign Fund, Dr. Mohammed Farid, Executive Chairman of the Egyptian Exchange, and last but not least, Dr. Nada Masoud, Economic Advisor to the Minister of Planning and member of the Executive Director Boards of ISDB. Did I get it right? Welcome, everybody. So, before I sit down, I'm going to ask a question for everybody. I would like to get a short answer from each of you on it so we get the ball rolling. And I just want to say something here, ladies and gentlemen. We would like this to be really an interactive session. This is about private public sector and partnership and the integration that Chairman of the Islamic Development Bank spoke about this morning. So if you are from the private sector and sitting in this room, please get your questions ready. We would like to present these questions to our esteemed panelists. So, the first question for each and every one of you. What does a path to climate resilience look like for you, and what role does green finance play in that journey? Your Excellency, I'll start with you.
Thank you very much for the introduction, and happy to be with you. I'm assuming that I should continue in English or switch to Arabic.
The session is in English, but there is translation if you need to speak in Arabic.
It's okay. I will continue in English. There is no problem with that. Let me say something. You've asked a very important question, whether this green financing should come from demand or from supply. I believe it has to be coming from both, because now the whole world is talking about climate change, climate challenge, and reducing emission and comply with reducing carbon level and all of that. In order to do that, and in order to be achieving the objective of the United Nations climate requirement and all of that, you need financing. You need to finance the transition in a just way. Now, what we have been hearing, promises, with good promises. No one is really translating the promises this world have heard for a long time into a reality. If you would like to get an example, I give you an example. Egypt believed in the promises and led the Middle East, North Africa in issuing the green bond. What promises we've heard? That there will be lower cost financing as long as it is green financing. We will get more and much better terms and conditions for financing. Believe me, this is not reality. I've been to the market, the international market. I found that this is just a talk, not an implementation. The promises are not there yet. So I took the demand part. I went to the market, the international market. I said, I'm coming for green financing. Where's the supply? Where is the supply? Oh, the market said, no, there is no difference between the traditional Eurobond and the green bond. It was the opposite, that I have to tell everybody, green bond, green financing will cost you more. Will cost you more. Why? once I issued, they said, okay, now you need to contract a consultant. This consultant will come, sit down, get the information about the finance you've made, and you have to hire an auditor. You have to pay for all of that. You have to get a team, and this team will work for the whole year to prepare the information, to prepare the report, and all of that. And you have to pay. So I said, what? They said, yes. This is a green finance. So I said, okay, so you are doing that I can pay more for the international consultant and the international auditor and the international work. So this is a trap. This is not a green financing. So until now, it's a promises without a reality. So it has to come from now the supply. I have to get something cheaper in order to do both. To cover the additional cost I have to pay, and also to give me incentives. You are asking me to move and make a transition from the current project, the current situation, to a green project, friendly climate project, and all of that. In order to make this transition, I will have to pay a lot of money. So who will finance that? It's impossible to ask developing nations, emerging market or emerging countries, and you ask for African countries to pay the cost when they are not responsible for all these problems. So again, I have to say that unless the promises are translated to a reality and we get a cheap financing for a just transition and to ensure that this world will implement its promises, and this is why we say now it's a time for implementation of such promises, and see us, where is the cheap financing? Where is the financing for green just transition? It's not there. But I have to say, on the other side, I've got a good experience when I asked some regional and international banks, can I go for a green loan? And I have to admit that they said, yes, we can go for green loan. And I managed to get a green loan for $1.5 billion. And when I do that, a lot of work I have to do it, because I have to prepare these projects which will be complying with the requirement to be green, to be financed by a green loan. And I have to get a team who is qualified and special for this project. So again, I'm trying. Unless we found that what this world is saying, that we're going to help with a good financing, I don't believe that we will be able to achieve climate objectives.
Well, thank you. That's quite a powerful answer for the question. Thank you. And I will come back to your points. Maybe Mr. Ayman could tell us. I mean, my answer remains standing, which is, what does the path to climate resilience look for you, and how do you see the role of green financing? And I'm sure you want to pick up from what His Excellency have said.
Absolutely, and I think I couldn't have put it in better words. And maybe to add on to that challenge, we're trying to find a solution to the challenge. And part of that solution is the championship program, is how do you fund the gap. There is a transition gap, there is a funding gap for the transition. And that funding gap has to be filled either by government efforts, by access to concessional finance. But there's also a pathway, a lot of hindsight in different technologies that have been available to the market on helping to go green, especially like the example we learned from the PV panel manufacturing and the cost and how that technology became mainstream, how that technology became an actual cheap alternative that is a source of energy that is cheaper than conventional energy. But until you come from that point to a mainstream point, there's a lot of, there's a transition funding gap that needs to attract green funding and grants. So some of the concessions, some of the private developers are filling that gap with grants. So grants may be a subsidy or a hack, as they say, to fill that gap. But it's not a solution. It's not a permanent solution. So a permanent solution is an actual ecosystem that works. Emerging markets are feeling that pain. So I definitely echo what His Excellency Minister Maid said. It is a pain that we as emerging markets feel. We're not getting our just share of either carbon credits or just share of spending on building those technologies or scaling them up. But at least from a half full perspective, a half cup full cup perspective, we look at a road to crowd in private sector developers and investors to try and fill in that funding gap with viable projects that can rely on government support, can rely on government offtake, can rely on grants, can rely on all sorts of means of ensuring capital, and of course a lot of appetite and market. And I think this would be a good segue for my co-panelist, Dr. Farid, on how stock markets and how regulators are actually crowding in those developers to actually spend money behind complying, and that is a good incentive for them to try and comply and spend maybe the extra premium on going green versus staying gray.
Well, I think, as you said, it's a good segue for Dr. Farid. If you give us your viewpoint on what was said so far.
Thank you for the invitation, and I would like to thank all of the people here for their patience to start this session. So I hope we can elevate the energy levels, given that this is the last session for the day, if I'm not mistaken. So thank you for bearing with us. In a nutshell, I would say the sustainability path would be pertinent to or related to having every activity related to sustainability embedded in our normal course of business. I know that's quite a long sentence to say, but what do I mean by a normal course of business? Just lately, if I'm not mistaken, one of the Glasgow outcomes was the ISSB, which is basically a subsidiary entity from the IFRS, the entity responsible for all accounting standards and financial reporting standards that are being adopted worldwide in different countries, whether developing countries or developed as well. So in that case, by having a sister entity or a subsidiary entity that is aiming at developing standardized standards for sustainability. So this is quite a very important aspect, because nowadays we have, I would say, not less than 15 entities that each one of them would have their own type of reporting standards or whatever they get to deem sustainable, and other projects are not deemed sustainable by some other entity that has created those reporting or those monitoring standards. So basically having an internationally accepted reporting standard when it comes to sustainability, and here sustainability, if I may say, is much broader than green financing and issues pertinent to the green economy. Sustainability, we have 17 sustainable development goals are issued by the United Nations. That would entail education, that would entail life over under the sea, that would entail proper jobs for and decent jobs for the societies at large. So basically, we need to look at sustainability that it is much larger than just environment. Environment is definitely one very important aspect when it comes to sustainability, but it's not the only aspect regarding sustainability. So that would be my opinion towards the route or the path for sustainability, is to see sustainability embedded in all standards globally that can be implemented. And by having this, we can start to say that yes, sustainable projects or sustainable thinking is embedded in our daily life. When it comes to whether supply or demand would prevail, I would answer like any economist, it depends. So here, for example, His Excellency Minister Maid said, definitely it requires both, but initially to go to the market and start asking for financing for green bonds, basically you needed to have the projects. So here, supply is a prerequisite, definitely, to be able to solicit demand and ask people who have supposedly sufficient funds. And I agree with His Excellency that we're not walking the talk, as they say. So yes, we're all talking about green and blue and all the colors that you might be liking in the world. However, it is not actually subsidized sufficiently when it comes from an investor perspective. So why it depends? Again, it depends because you need to have the pipeline. Without having the pipeline, you don't need the financing to go to the demand side. So definitely, and accordingly, it depends on the condition or the state that you're starting from. Egypt 5 years ago, we didn't have any, I would say, renewable energy policy, and one of the, I would say, seminal decisions that have been taken by the government of Egypt, and here we need to say seminal, was the feed-in tariff program. So before having the feed-in tariff program that was issued for buying from renewable projects from solar and wind, this industry was a dead industry in Egypt. No one was caring about investing in solar or wind unless or until actually we had the feed-in tariff decision or decree that was issued by the cabinet that put these projects into economic viability. So that is the point. Having these projects economically viable, you start investing. So here is the supply side. You start asking for the funding. So basically, funding started to come up, maybe from donor agencies as a starting point, complemented by the banking sector. But I definitely do agree that financing, we need to talk about adaptation and mitigation costs. That is not being borne or initiated by Africa or emerging economies, but actually advanced economies have been the main reason behind what we're facing nowadays in climate change. But most probably we are going to pay the price with them, of course, but we are going to pay a significant portion of the price. I mean, that's my hopefully 2 sentences in that regard. Thank you.
Well, thank you. Maybe this is something to be raised at COP, I guess. Dr. Nada, and I mean, as a Ministry of Planning,
yes,
how do you create the supply?
Yeah, thank you very much, Ma'moon. I think my previous panelists pretty much said it all. What I was going to say, but what I would like to say is that you're asking the path to sustainability. I don't think it's becoming a matter of if or when. If it is happening, when it's now. It's the pattern of the path, that how the path will look like, and the path will look like it will be a proper path, and it will take us fast to real sustainability in its real meaning and sense if we have the full ecosystem in place. And I agree with Dr. Mohammed Farid that sustainability is not just about environment and climate, and even when it comes to climate, it's not only about climate mitigation. In our countries and most developing countries, their contribution to the global warming and to all climate changes is minimal. Egypt's contribution is 0.006%. So even if we adjust all our projects and everything, this will have nothing to do. This will have no effect on global warming. What we really need is to support and finance mitigation, because we are at the receiving end of global warming and climate change. And if we, so it's the full ecosystem that will define the path. It is looking at sustainability in its broader sense, and even environment, looking at both mitigation and adaptation, which matters more to developing countries. As to supply or demand, I think it's both, but I agree also again with Dr. Mohammed Farid, the supply comes first. You have to provide the pipeline, and the government has to support this, because there is green finance. It creates returns, financial returns in the short term and bigger ones in the longer term, but it creates value. It creates value for the society. It creates cost efficiency and cost cutting, risk mitigation, new opportunities. It empowers innovation. So for the society is important, and that's the role of the government, to ensure that what's better for the society takes place. To supply with the support of the government, and demand, and transforming of finance. The transformation of finance is crucial to ensuring that we really take the path to sustainability. Thank you.
Thank you. Well, I mean, Your Excellency, you've highlighted what you've done, and one aspect is the green bond, and now you've led the region with that. How do you capitalize in this positioning? Now you've done it, and you have an example. How do you take it further? How do you bring the region along with you, maybe to apply more pressure, or maybe to achieve your objectives from the global financial market? So how do you see your role as a Minister of Finance to take it to the next step, especially COP is coming here to this amazing city?
We worked on that and we thought, okay, let us move one step further. Let us upgrade this green financing framework to a more objective and go for sustainability bond and try to include with that dimension of social and sustainability and sustainable project and be a wider. But let me say something. With this current crisis, which is affecting the financial markets, can we see that the financial investors and the capital market and the financial international financial institutions are willing to say, okay, with all these troubles in the financing, the global financing, and we will make something special for those green financing, for those sustainable financing, for all of that? I have to say to you, the answer is no. Why? Because, look, again, they ask you to move green. They ask you to comply with climate change requirements. They ask you to move towards the transition from the current situation to less carbon and all of that. When you say to them, okay, I'm willing to do that, but can you help me with the financing requirement? I have to say, I wouldn't get it. And if I get it, not at the financing cost, which can encourage me to say, oh yes, this is something very important. And for this reason, we said, okay, look, the current situation is difficult for all of us, particularly developing, emerging countries, and we think that we are taking the COP27 into Africa, and we are hosting this for the African continent in Sharm el-Sheikh. Okay, so we need to do something for the African continent and for getting something in reward for climate compliance. Can we try to do something with debt and the debt service in return for climate change compliance and financing the adoption and mitigation? Can we do something? We will try, and we're thinking that we are planning to host an African ministers of finance, environment, economics, and international cooperation in Sharm el-Sheikh or in Cairo. We haven't decided, but it will be 7 to 9 to try to see something to present it to the COP27 in Sharm el-Sheikh in November, in order to see, okay, let us come with a financing framework which can be implemented. It's not just a promises as it was done in the previous COP. In order to do that, I have to come back again with the issue of leading in the region. We tried to be a leader, and we were happy to be a leader with the green bond. We issued $750 million a green bond. It was the first in the MENA region. I believe the first or second in the whole of continent of Africa. With the green loan, we did the same. Now we are trying to move to sustainable bond with all the commitment. But again, if you ask me as a Minister of Finance who have been through this experience, I have to say to you, if I have to choose now, I will not go. I will go for traditional Eurobond. Why? Because of the additional cost. You are imposing additional cost. Look, sometimes we make a joke. It might be a joke, but it might be a reality. Are we in a trap to pay more? To the consultant and the auditors, the international consultant and the international auditors, they need more work. So they encourage us to go green in order after that we contract with them to come and audit, to come and help us making reports and all of that, because the additional cost with such type of financing is something which is not taken into consideration for those who are pricing the green financing. So still you are not accommodating the requirement for us, or even to support me and help me on a transition which need a finance, and it has to be a just transition on all aspects. So again, as Egypt, I love to see Egypt leading on every type of green financing. I hope to see Egypt as a leader, as a model for others, and I'm willing to do that. But eventually, I'm a Minister of Finance. I have to pay the cost. So unless I see that encouragement of a cheaper green financing, I would say my experience is not that good to tell everybody about.
Thank you. Well, everybody knows now. What is the role of the Sovereign Wealth Fund in this space? Where are you prioritizing the climate consideration when it comes to investment? And especially because it's in line with the Vision 2030. And how are you doing that? Mike, if you could speak more.
Oh yeah, it's working now.
I think his voice activated.
So the hack that we as a fund work with is actually, we understand the challenge of sourcing green financing per se. But the target is, we are developing the product. As Dr. Farid was saying, well, on the supply side, there's tons of product. Egypt is a real economy market. So in our view, we're trying to look at what the real economy can offer to a green product. And that green product, once there, is attractive enough to Western money, is attractive enough to green financing to come and chase that product, because they need that product to exist. And the prevalent example is renewable to X. So Egypt has a very successful story around renewables and the feed-in tariff program for Ben Ben. We created the largest solar farm on the planet. Now, what is the downstream use of that renewable energy? And now with the technological breakthroughs that are happening, we're seeing a flux of investments coming in demand of green fuel. And green fuel in North Africa is going to solve the problem of our friends across the pond, across the Mediterranean. This is a key win, or a key find that we are capitalizing on. So on that advantage, on that opportunity, we're building a product pipeline that is now on the burden of, it's not the burden of the Egyptian government anymore, it's the burden of the private investors that are coming in to crowd in that green financing for them to be able to extract and produce the product at scale that their own governments need. So it is now their burden to solicit that financing. So this is one way of trying to solve that problem or bridge that gap. As a fund, we look at, I wear the hat of an investor that is rubbing shoulders with private investors, private developers, looking at trying to develop their own pipeline of projects. So we found those opportunities. We highlight the opportunity of, why don't you invest in an upstream renewable towards a green fuel? And the green fuel goes to tons of uses. We are a big market of fertilizers, we're a big market of heavy industry, we are a big market of data and digital services. If you green the source for all of those, then you're achieving a significant impact to the world. And we're not only greening our own footprint, carbon footprint as an economy, but we're actually contributing to greening the footprint of other economies as well. So we are actually delivering that to the rest of the world. And we have massive capacities to do so on real economy side. Then comes the definition of sustainability, and I'll borrow that term of sustainability is not only around the resource sustainability, it's also around efficiency and financial discipline. Financial discipline delivers financial sustainability, which is also another format of sustainability. So we try and combine all of those into investable propositions that are well governed. So come to our part of the world, you will enhance your ESG score. Come to our part of the world, you will find good, well-structured products that are investable. And I can give you tons of examples of what we can offer as an economy to investors to come into that space. But this is, as a continent now, leading to the COP, we want to say that this is replicable. our Ministry of Finance has been quite instrumental to successful launch of the feed-in tariff, because their sovereign guarantee is a worthy instrument that enabled that program. That is a worthy instrument that maybe some other economies don't enjoy the luxury of having that currency acceptable to the international financing world. We need to build on that example and then help other markets follow in our footsteps to try and find their way towards that sustainability. Thank you.
Dr. Farid, I have one quick question and one slightly longer question. I know now that I've been told at least that New York Stock Exchange actually tends or is already started to punish companies who claim ESG in their annual reports and they don't deliver. So governance around ESG claim is now happening in a stock market like New York. So are we going to see this in this part of the world? And my second quick question, and I think that is about, according to the World Bank, green social sustainability and sustainability-linked bonds, which is called GSS, is just 2.2% of the overall 27 trillion global bond issuance. Do you think this is going to happen here? I mean, do you think it's possible that Egypt can participate in growing this percentage? Maybe we could start with the New York Stock Exchange.
With the New York Exchange, okay. Well, my answer will start that I'm not sure that the New York Stock Exchange penalizes companies for sustainability disclosure. So this is something that we're not sure of, but most probably they're doing that. When it comes for EGX, I can tell you the journey that we went through, because it was indeed a journey. It wasn't pertinent to or related to any person, honestly speaking. It was related to the DNA of the entity, or what we believe in, or what the entity believes in from quite a long period of time. I might be amazing you when I tell you that EGX was the second country in the entire, I would say, Middle East, North Africa, and probably in emerging markets to issue a sustainability index. Maybe there hasn't been much, I would say, marketing for this index that was issued in 2010, around end of 2010, for companies that are scoring high when it comes to environment, social responsibility, and governance. But maybe it was the luck situation to issue this index around end of 2010 that by January 2011 we were focusing on a very different issue, was the survival of the platform, ensuring that trading is on a continuum basis on the EGX. But sustainability concept was there since 2010 by issuing the first index, and this was not a locally developed index. It was developed in conjunction with Standard & Poor's. So that's the starting point. The recent developments that was taking place by the issuance of listing requirements for companies to get listed on the EGX is to gradually cement or incorporate some of the requirements, either from a governance perspective. So the board composition and how it's supposed to be, the number of independent members, etc., etc. And then you move a second step. Okay, you need to have a specific IR representative at your company to be able to communicate, and etc., etc. And then you move another step by requiring to have a representation or diversity when it comes to gender. And then you're moving now by the decree issued by the regulator in Egypt is to have a full set of disclosures, which is called the TCFD, which is basically financial disclosures related to environment and sustainability, and that would be for companies. It's a full set of disclosure, which is more or less mimicking, or it resembles the GRI disclosure framework for companies that have a net equity of more than 500 million. And nowadays, yes, we do penalize companies if the deadlines associated with governance or board compositions, if it is associated with the timing of issuing the financials in the appropriate timing, we get to penalize if they are not going to issue, because the deadline for the final issuances of the reports, sustainability reports associated with or attached to the board of directors report, that would be around the end of this year. And that's why at EGX We implemented a very comprehensive training program with around 108 of the listed companies, which are subject to the decree of the net equity of 500 million. So we need to understand there is a differentiation in the regulatory framework between large corporations with a net equity of 500 million or net capital of 500 million and less than this 500 million. So it was 108 companies that we provided this training, because what we need to understand, it's a journey of knowledge. Here, when we get to speak as entities and regulators and market providers, we do understand that it is quite important, and we need to see sustainability and disclosures associated with the environment, carbon emissions, carbon footprint coming to life. But for companies in specifically messy situations, like we're seeing with the war between Ukraine and Russia and all of the turbulence that we're seeing, it is basically for them, they are considering it a luxury. It is if anyone had looked at organizational behavior, the Maslow hierarchy, for them you're talking about self-actualization, while for them it is about the basic needs and necessities that they need, and to survival that they need to cater for. So this is the struggle that we get to see every day when we speak to companies, that it is important. Don't underestimate the importance of sustainability. Yes, I do agree with His Excellency the Minister that we need to see entities, specifically foreign investors and institutional investors, to put their money where their mouth is, as they say it in very simple and layman terms. That we need to see money going for companies that are abiding and incurring the costs associated with this point. That was supposed to be the question with a short answer. Yes. Okay, so that is the short answer for the question. I can elaborate and extend my answer for 5 more minutes. What was the second question?
I've asked you both. About the first one was about the New York Stock Exchange.
Yes. And what is
the second one was about the GSS bonds.
Yes, okay. So the GSSF, it is basically the abbreviation for the different types of bonds: green, social, sustainable, and sustainable related bonds. The issuances for these types of bonds worldwide is around 3.5 trillion. So I'm not sure about the figure. Does it match the 2%? Because that was the issuances of this, out of which in the green bonds it was around 1.7 trillion worldwide. We are seeing a dent or a decline in the number of green bonds that are being issued in the first quarter of 2022, maybe because of the turbulence that we're seeing in international markets and what's happening. It is making it difficult for companies to go and issue bonds. Having said that, we have the entire regulatory framework for issuing green bonds in terms of the listing requirements, in terms of having special requirements on the structure of the green bonds, how it should be designed. The regulator, the auditors, and we have some auditors here in the room, should be blamed for the high costs that they are putting on the issuances of the different types of bonds and so on and so forth. But the auditors type, the consultants, that they need to stamp that this is actually a green project that would yield either in CO2 reduction or mitigation or whatever these aspects. The regulatory framework is there, it is present, and we actually have seen, and probably encouraged by the issuance of the Ministry of Finance of the 750 million green bond, was the issuance of one of the private banks operating here in Egypt and listed on EGX, to issue a privately placed bond with the magnitude of $100 million, and the entire amount of this 100 million is held by one of the donor agencies, or the IFC basically. So yes, we should be expecting, should the supply side increase, with our effort to educate companies and the markets. But what I need us all to take care of, we don't want to increase the regulatory arbitrage between listed and unlisted companies. While we're doing this as regulators and market organizers to increase the level of regulatory disclosures, ESG disclosures, and all of these aspects, unlisted companies are not requested to do anything. So here, this regulatory arbitrage needs to be bridged a little bit, whereby we start asking other unlisted companies with some of these aspects. Because if we mean business, the I would say sustainable development goals is not only related to exchanges; it's related to the entire business community in terms of employment, education, environment, and all of the aspects that is affecting the society and humanity in general. I took too much time. Sorry. Thank you.
Well, I would like to ask you to prepare your questions and to who you're going to ask. But first, Dr. Nada, I mean, the minister this morning, Minister of Planning, said that the reform process now is in the second phase and it's looking at productive sectors. And the question is that, is the aspect of sustainability going to be fully integrated into this reform process, and how it's going to affect, the people in those sectors?
Yeah, thank you very much. Yes, we are actually not embarking on, but we did launch phase 2 of the economic reform program. Phase 1 was in 2016, and it was mostly focused on monetary and fiscal reforms. And then in 2021, April 2021, we launched the second phase of economic reforms, which was focused on structural reforms, transforming and changing the structure of the Egyptian economy towards more emphasis on 3 sectors: manufacturing, agriculture, and ICT. And in the process, we had 5 cross-cutting pillars that we had measures for reforms in. Basically, business environment and empowering the private sector, transforming the labor market into an efficient and flexible labor market, increasing access to finance, and speeding up financial inclusion, improving governance, both of SOEs and the government entities and the municipalities, and human capital. These were the main elements of the second phase of the structural reforms. But yet, that was in April 2021, and it has been more than a year since then. So in April 2022, we analyzed the program, and we assessed the performance gaps since the start of the program, and we are changing the way our ministry and actually the government by and large is approaching development. We are switching from development through projects to development through policies. I mean, we were focused on development through projects, Hayya Karima, mega projects, infrastructure, roads, and so electricity, and so on and so forth. But now we are more focused on the government sets the policies. The projects should be done by the private sector. So it's development through policies, not development through projects, as was the case over the last period of time. I don't want to take much on that, but if anyone wants to ask further on this, I want to give you room for your floor to ask. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, who would like to ask a question? All right, I'll start here, then I'll come to you, sir. Please state your name and your organization. And who are you directing the question to?
Thank you.
The mic is not working. Can we have another mic, please? Another mic, please? No? Please come in.
It's working.
It's working now. It's working.
Thank you. My name is Ibrahim Al-Dukhairi. I'm the Director General of the Arab Organization for Agricultural Development. My question to His Excellency the Minister, thank you very much for being clear and vocal on the issues that we are here to discuss. And from the panel, what we have heard so far is that we need to be, for green financing, we need to be inclusive. That's the key message that I took at least. If we see what is happening now, issues of climate change have been narrowed down to mitigation and mitigation to carbon credit. That's not taking us anywhere. apart of all the complaints that His Excellency the Minister has said. My question is the time frame. We believe that the next COP27 is a chance for all of us developing countries. Do you think, Your Excellency, the time frame from here until we meet again here in Sharm el-Sheikh in November is enough to change the narrative based on the challenges ahead of us that you have already been very vocal? Thank you very much.
Let me say that collectively, yes, we can work together, and I think there are a lot of efforts. Since Glasgow, the COP26, I personally attend. We talked about we need to move from what we have been promising to see a reality on the ground, to see implementation. And at this meeting, it was the Secretary of Treasury of United States of America, of Britain, of Germany, of Indonesia. There were a lot of ministers of finance or those who are responsible for the big financial of this world. So we are all recognizing that there is a need to come up with something which can work on the ground and can help to achieve the climate change objectives. And it has to be just, it has to be, let me say, a transition. It has to address the concern of those countries who are not responsible for the issue of climate challenges, and they are asked to pay the price for something they haven't done it. Okay, so now we think that unless we come up with something, I don't believe that countries will commit to, go in the road they are asked to go. I know some countries, for example, in Africa, they say, why you are asking us to do something which will harm our people, which will affect negatively our growth? Why you are asking us to shut down this, to stop this, not to finance that? You will not be allowed to produce that. Why? And if you want us to do that, come and help me to finance that. Come and to provide me with something tangible on the ground, not a word. It's an implementation. We are in a process of talking with others. Can we come by November something which we start to implement? And this is the reason why, after consultation, we have chosen slogan for the COP27, Together for Implementation. Even with the financing part, we said to come up with a common stand for developing and emerging countries. We will host this conference in September in order to come up with something, and we'll host also a financing day on the side of the COP27 in order to ensure that we will come up with something to start the implementation. We hope we will succeed, and we are working on that. We are trying to bring all the big players with us on achieving that. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I think the gentleman there, could you please give him the mic? Somebody needs to tell me about the time. How much time do I have? 2 more questions? Okay. After this one.
Is this working? Can you hear me?
If you could speak loud.
Yeah, can you hear me now? Okay, great. First of all, thank you very much for this very informative panel. I have a question for our friend from the EGX, I think it is. And the question is, do you think that there is a chance that we could change the definition in a regulatory manner of fiduciary responsibility? So for example, CalPERS, the California Retirement Pension System in California, the largest in the world, actually takes it upon their fiduciary responsibility to invest in the long term, which includes ESG criteria in their investment decision making. And in Buenos Aires, for example, in 2010 or 11, they allowed people, they made it a regulation that you had to have a GRI report for companies listed on the stock exchange. And the next year, of course, every company did one, but then it lapsed and then every company stopped doing it. So it'd be very interesting to see if we could, one, change the definition of fiduciary responsibility to include ESG, or two, require sort of a sustainability report like the global report.
Thank you.
Just one last quick one. For our friend with the global security bonds, I work with the International Fund for Agricultural Development, and we're looking for partners for smallholder agriculture. I'm just wondering if any of the green bonds that you've seen get filtered down into agriculture and then even further down to real sustainable activities like smallholder farming. Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Farid? Hello? You just speak, I think it will trigger.
It will turn on, okay, so it turned on. I'm not sure I got the first point of your question, however, I'll address the second point. We have already the disclosure reporting and requirements when it comes to ESG governed, or let's not say governed, a mere replica of what is the GRI more or less is a requirement for the disclosures. So anything that is pertinent to environment is coming from GRI reporting, and we have done, that's what I exactly said, that we have done an extensive training for 108 companies, and I believe some of those companies are sitting here with us in the room for sustainability and how to implement or how to answer and address these type of reporting that is being requested by EGX and the regulator in the Egyptian context. So this is happening already. It's not that it's not happening. It is already happening. And supposedly the deadline is end of this year. But having said that, this does not mean that we don't have cases of already listed companies that have their own sustainability reports that are being published to the entire spectrum of investors and being acquainted, and they are champions, I have to say, when it comes to whatever is sustainable and the initiatives that they are taking. All of these aspects are being incorporated in some of these reports that are already published on EGX screens and from the disclosures by companies. I'm not sure I got your first point, but I hope I answered some of it.
Thank you. We said, it seems like there's a lot more questions. All right, we will start with you, sir, then we'll go to the lady. We'll take 3 questions from you, sir, and you, sir, and ma'am there. And that will be it. I'm sorry for timing.
Really, I would like to thank Dr. Mike because
go ahead.
For his straight and honest and practical analysis for this situation. So it's only a matter of it's worth for appreciation and thank you for Dr. Mike.
All right, thank you, sir. Maybe if you pass, for this lady first. No, the lady in blue, please. First, please.
Merci beaucoup. Je voudrais féliciter tous les panélistes qui nous ont donné des éclairages sur les financements verts. Cela m'intéresse à plus d'un titre parce que...
I'm sorry, we can't really hear you. You need to speak much louder. Are you speaking in French or in... Can you speak in English if you don't mind?
Yes.
Thank you, ma'am. Thank you. We don't have the translation with us.
I congratulate all the panelists. The question is very important for me because of our project of modernizing cities for green cities in future. How we can accept to the financement, green finance. What bank or what institution are eligible to give credit by financial green finance? What is the rapport between green finance and green funds.
Thank you.
very much.
Thank you. I think if I heard it right, it's for you, Mr. Suleiman, that how can we? Sure, but let me just repeat that question and just answer it. It's about financing projects. I think you're from Senegal, ma'am. Projects for modernizing cities in Senegal. How can they access funding from potentially a sovereign wealth fund or from banks in whole of Africa? Okay.
So, as a sovereign fund, we actually joined the collective of African sovereign funds on creating a sustainable platform for co-investment, where we replicate examples of our own success stories in Egypt and other success stories across Africa to share with other sovereign funds. I think the model of the Egyptian sovereign fund is quite unique compared to the other sovereign funds around the world, because we come from a structure of an emerging market economy. We are not a capital abundant economy similar to other oil-rich economies that may fund their sovereign funds to be on the buy side for the rest of the world. So this is where we're different, and of course the African theme for sovereign funds is quite similar to the Egyptian example. And our answer to that question is to create a pathway to crowd in private investments into sustainable projects, well-defined, well-structured investment propositions. And when you create that platform, when you create that pipeline of products, of investment products, where you as your own sovereign fund co-invest, but you invest on a minority scale and you allow to crowd in a majority investor coming into those investments, in that space you are able to create a similar impact of sovereign funds of rich economies injecting and investing behind their own set of projects that are of their own national interest. In Egypt, there is a similar example of the migration of the new capital or the creation of new sustainable cities across Egypt. And the creation of that program is partially funded by the government and partially funded by crowding in private investors to deliver on that thesis and to deliver on that vision. This is the model that works best for emerging markets where there is no capital abundance, but you tap the private market for that for those projects. That goes for a framework to invest in infrastructure projects, in particular real estate projects, for instance. All of those are once they are well defined and well structured, they attract capital. And when you show that you are co-investing as a government, or a branch of the government is co-investing with skin in the game, then it creates the right alignment to give those good, successful models to replicate.
Thank you. I've been told one question, but I'm going to cheat. I'm going to have two questions at the same time. They will answer them together. First you, Sarah, then Mr. Shafiq. Ask your questions back to back and we'll answer them together.
Okay. Based on what His Excellency has mentioned, I'd like to say why we always receive their initiatives or their proposal. Why we don't create our own, which is suitable for us and meets the benefits of all parties. As His Excellency said that the green finance is not suitable for our countries. So instead of receiving, we should create the initiatives and propose to them, which is really create benefit for all parties.
Thank you. Thank you. So, Mr. Sharif, and this is the last question. Thank you for your interest.
Thank you. My name is Sharif Diwani. I represent Alexandria Business Association here today. Your Excellency, I'm chasing you around the world. 2 weeks ago, we were in London. I asked you about Dr. Might. I asked about green finance. I'm here to ask you again, but in from another angle. It's when you describe the demand and the context within which the demand for green financing exists, I fully agree with you. Definitely, emerging economies are not responsible for the damage, and our contribution to climate damage is very small. So I'm going to make a statement, and I want a correction from you if it's correct what I understand. It seems to me, with that type of context, that the demand for financing for mitigation is much smaller for us, for countries like Egypt. It's much smaller than the demand for financing for adaptation. And because, and in that case, you can finance mitigation in solutions like what Dr. Ayman and Dr. Mohammed Farid said, that you can either crowd in the private sector or make structural reforms that can attract private investment. So the problem remains how to finance adaptation. This is where the real problem for countries like Egypt are. And this is the size of the problem that is bigger than the size of the demand for mitigation. Is that correct understanding?
Thank you. Thank you. Can we be proactive and do our own thing? And how can we finance adaptation? Maybe just very quickly, whoever can answer, start with you, Your Excellency, and let's close with this. Thank you.
It's not an easy question, to be honest. But I believe there are a lot of different ways to do it. And I have to say that there is no one single way of financing adaptation which can work and cover that. I believe that we have to come up with a package because every country will have its own way for adaptation and its own way of financing that adaptation. For example, there are some countries which can do it by local financing, okay? But in order for them to do it at the expense of other projects, they need to finance the other projects. So who will interfere for financing the other project or other financing? So now, if you would like me to concentrate on some ways, I have to allocate resources either by domestic or international. So it will come at the expense of others. In order for me to come at the end of the year and to say to you, yes, I've achieved that. So let me say that I personally talked about my experience when we go to the international market, when we go to borrowing from commercial banks. But there are some others with the international financial institutions, some others with other governments of countries who are willing to give us some grants or to make debt swap or to see that they can offer something at very low cost. So I believe it's not one way to say that this is the best way to finance adaptation.
Thank you. Thank you. Well, I've been waved at, so I'm going to close here. I want to really thank our fantastic panel. We promised an exciting panel. I hope it was. So thank you, everybody. Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mahmoud Subeh, and all the panelists and His Excellency Finance, Dr. Mohammed Moeed. Thank you, everyone. And by this, we come to the end of day one for ISDB Group Private Sector Forum 2022. I hope you have all learned from all the speakers who have joined us from across the globe. And let me tell you that tomorrow we will be starting at 9 a.m. for a dialogue with His Excellency Dr. Mustafa Madbouli, the Prime Minister of the Arab Republic of Egypt. This will be at 9 a.m. tomorrow, and so we request you all to join us tomorrow to hear him deliver his keynote address. Thank you.